It's a game played with a stick, a ball, and a piece of leather. It's about the only time a young boy will ever think about a diamond, except this time it's covered in dirt. I'm talking about baseball. The game of baseball has become a staple of American culture since the early 1800s, with names like Barry Bonds, Babe Ruth, Mickey Mantle, and Mike Trout being household names. It feels like baseball has been around since the beginning of the country. But when did it start? How did it come to be the staple of American culture and American sports? That's what I'm here today to talk to you about. I'm here today to explain the creation of baseball. There are some mythical stories as to how baseball came to be in America. The most famous and well known story for the creation of baseball was that a man named Abner Doubleday created the game in Cooperstown, New York in the year 1839. According to this story, the myth was created by A.J. Spalding, who, as we all know, is Spalding Sports, and his name is used as a big sporting goods company now. He started this story in early 1904, and it stuck to be as the creation story of baseball. Major League Baseball would actually pull so hard on this story that they would open the Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown, New York, and it would become the holy ground of baseball fans from around the world. But how do you make one lie become what everybody accepts as the national sports creation story? Well, you make it American and patriotic. Baseball really resembles the game of rounders, which is basically the English version of baseball, that it was created way back in the 1700s as a child's game that they would play in the schoolyard. And one sports writer back in the day, Henry Chadwick, he was very well known at the time. He kept writing about how baseball is just a glorified version of rounders. Well, Spalding didn't like that too much because he was making money when people kept buying sports equipment for baseball. And so he and his buddy, that was the president of the National League of Baseball, got together and proclaimed to the whole nation that we're going to perform an investigation into the beginnings and creation and origin story of baseball. So they had people from all over the country write in stories of when they first started playing baseball back in the 1800s. And pretty much everybody said the Rounders theory was correct, and that's pretty much where they got it from and all this stuff. And Spalding didn't really like that too much. But he had one guy write in and say that actually this guy named Abner Doubleday created it, and that was the story that he needed, and so he blew it up and ran with it, and it became the origin story of baseball, and it was accepted actually for about 80 years, and finally historians kind of did away with it, but that was the main origin story, and that's pretty much the most well-known origin story of baseball. But in the lie of Abner Doubleday creating baseball, is there any truth to that story at all? Well, there is a little bit. And as the story goes on, it tells of a man named Alexander Cartwright who created one of the first baseball teams. And he actually wrote down some rules and really refined the game. And that was actually true. Alexander Cartwright started the Knickerbocker Baseball Club in New York in 1849, and he wrote down some rules and said this is what we're going to play as baseball. Some of those rules included the 9 players out at a time on defense and one batter, and the 9 innings, and bases being 90 feet apart. And all those things are still accepted today. And he took his team, the Knickerbocker Baseball Club, from New York, and they would go across the Hudson River into New Jersey and play at Elysian Fields in Hoboken, New Jersey. Cartwright's team consisted of all volunteer firefighters at the time, and they were actually named after the Knickerbocker engine crew, and so that's how they got their name. And his team really set the basis of what baseball will be. They were a clean cut group of guys that really played, baseball how they thought baseball should be played, and so it gained a lot of popularity around them, and they would get buddies to come out and play against them, and so then baseball teams kind of started to grow around the area of New York, and eventually that popularity spread, and Cartwright started taking his team and traveling all around the East Coast mainly, and then in about in the early 1850s, he actually moved to California in the Gold Rush, and he took baseball with him there pretty much, and spread baseball to the West Coast side of the country. And he eventually moved to Hawaii and took baseball with him to Hawaii. So then baseball was pretty much all across the country, and then baseball's popularity grew, and it became the staple of American culture that we know today. So, what exactly is the game of rounders that baseball draws so much of its origin from? It's an English game that was played in the 1700s up until today, that was mainly played by school children at first, and slowly grew in popularity, and more age groups started playing as it got more popular. But it's basically a very rough version of baseball. You have a bowler, who is a pitcher in baseball, a batter with a bat, and then you have defenders out in the field trying to get them out, and you have four bases, and you score a point when you get all four bases. So that was the real early version of it, but there are some very distinct similarities and differences between the two sports. One of the similarities is that there's four bases, and you score a run if a batter goes from home to first to second to third and back to home without getting tagged out. That is one main similarity between baseball and rounders. Another one is how the batter gets out. So if the batter hits and the ball is caught in the air without touching the ground, that is an out in baseball and rounders. If the ball is hit and the bag that the runner is going to is touched and the batter is out, that's also a similarity. Another way is if the batter is tagged with the ball, that is also an out in both sports. Some of the differences in the two games is that in rounders, if the batter drops the bat while he's running, he is considered out. But in baseball, it's the opposite. If you run with your bat, you are going to be called out in baseball. Another difference is in rounders, the bat is only about 18 inches long, when in baseball, the bat can be up to 35 inches in the major leagues. So the bat size is arguably very different, and so how you actually swing the bat is also different in the two sports. In rounders, you're going to swing with one hand. In baseball, you'll swing with two hands. It's a big difference in how you hit the ball. Another difference is strikes. We have strikes and balls in baseball. In rounders, they have a good ball and a bad ball. The strike zone in baseball is the bottom of the knee to right below your chest in baseball. In rounders, a good ball is considered anything from your head to your knee and within arm's reach. So if you are within that, it's considered a good ball. That ball is in play. Baseball is America's game, but its origin story will never be pinpointed because it can't be pinpointed. The game drew from rounders and town ball, with men and children playing a form of baseball in the streets. As it gained popularity throughout the country and Cartwright sat down and wrote down the rules, it became known as baseball. But the English will claim that they called it baseball before America did. America will say we called it baseball before the English did. Who knows who's right? But names like Adam Cartwright and Abner Doubleday will be remembered in the minds of baseball fans forever. But that's baseball. Something magical about the game will always be there. It always has been there. That's why it's loved by so many around the world. So maybe the creation story is whatever people say it is. Maybe for little Jimmy, that's 5 years old, the creation of baseball is him getting his first hit in T-ball and him falling in love with the game. For people like Albert Pujols that have been playing for almost 20 years, maybe the creation of baseball is every time he steps in the box when he falls in love with the game like he says he does every time he gets in. That's what makes baseball special. That's the story of baseball.